Next item is comments by the city manager.
Great, thank you very much, Mayor and members of City Council. Good evening. With us officially into 2020 now, the city has been engaged in planning and preparation for the upcoming census, and so I thought this would be a good time to have Michelle Friedrich, our planning technician, provide an update as to what's been going on, and we'll probably continue to do this at least quarterly, maybe, as we roll into the towards the end of 2020. So, Michelle.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council, for having me back to share a little bit more about what we've been working on for the 2020 census update. Census Day is less than 60 days away. Since our last update, we have been working hard and very focused on bringing awareness to the census via different groups and promotional avenues that the city of Lake Forest has. We've continued our involvement in the webinars with the Census Bureau representatives. The types and frequencies of these calls have increased and gives us the most up-to-date information to bring back directly to the Lake Forest community. We have given talks with various community groups and will continue to take advantage of those opportunities over the next 60 days. Other community groups have provided us the chance to share the census message in their print or email messages that they send out to their groups. Some of the promotional avenues and community groups we've been working with include messages in the city's water bills, the dialogue, rec brochure, train station bulletin board, community signboards, city building lobbies, Dickinson Hall News, school district newsletters, and the Chamber of Commerce newsletters. We've had some talks already with some of the Presbyterian Home residents, the Rotary, and participants at Dickinson Hall. We're also working on some ongoing planning efforts with other groups at Presbyterian Homes, Lake Forest Library, Lake Forest College, churches, League of Women Voters, TV ads on the Lake Forest Station, and the preschools. In addition, we've been updating the city's website on a weekly basis, if not more often. The page is linked directly in the news section on the city's main page and will remain there for the long term to help make finding our census information simple. We've also been working with the communications manager on pushing constant contact and social media posts out on a regular interval to continue to share the most recent and relevant census information with Lake Forest. To give you a brief timeline, the census still tells us that they will be mailing the invitations to respond beginning March 12th. And the intent of that invitation to respond is simply to inform residents there are 3 ways to respond: by paper, online, and by phone, and that all avenues are secure and safe. On our most recent call with the census just last week, they were able to announce that the online portal will be available in mid-March and will be coming forward with a solid date in the coming weeks. The census is also providing a lot of digital information to share with people, and we've been sharing that on our city site as well. One great thing that they've been able to provide to give people assurance in the questions that they're going to be asked is the ability to preview them. So that preview is also available on the city's website, and up there I've shown a brief, one of the questions, a brief look at that. And the first question on the census is, how many people were living or staying in your house, apartment, or mobile home on April 1st, 2020? And then you'll see down below that question there, they talk about who you include and why it's important to them. And who should be counted. This is the most important thing. And the best part of the message to share is that everyone needs to be counted once and in the right place. So everyone living in your home on April 1st, 2020 should be counted. College students living away from home should be counted in their campus housing. And snowbirds or people with multiple homes should be counted wherever they live and sleep most of the time. And the census also refers to that as their usual place of residence. And then lastly, becoming a census taker is still important. We hear this every week from the census that they are in need of census takers. So if anyone is interested in becoming a census taker, the link is there. It's also on the city's website. And if you just simply Google 2020 census jobs, you will find information on that. The jobs are most active in the spring and the summer months this year, as they will work to follow up with non-responders in the area. So again, just a brief thank you to allowing me a few minutes to share more about the latest census update with you. As Jason said, we'll be providing future updates for you. And remember to share the message to respond to the census.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That completes my report for this evening.
Thank you. I realized after I swore in the 3 new officers, I neglected to excuse the police force from the room to go celebrate. So you're all free to go.
Put it on the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty big crowd.
I feel safe already.
Wow.
I can watch it. Did they look very young?
Good question.
I'm not running against it.
Or they don't. Or they don't. They go home.
They don't. No, I think there's usually something.
That's gotta be a thrill for the families to see him sworn in.
Feeling on
Yeah.
Okay, next item is committee reports, and the first is a report from the Finance Committee. Consideration of an ordinance approving a fee schedule adjusting water rates for fiscal year 2021, its first reading. And Elizabeth Holub will quickly run us through the options.
I don't know why they wouldn't all have wanted to stay and listen to the discussion on water rates, but thank you, Mayor. This evening, we are requesting from the City Council first reading of an ordinance amending water rates effective May 1st, 2020. The material today will seem a bit similar to what you saw as a Finance Committee on January 21st, but just for the public, this has been discussed 2 previous occasions, the City Council Finance Committee at the Budget Workshop in November, and then a few weeks ago at the Finance Committee, January 21st, providing some additional information requested by the committee in November. So just as an overview, the city's water and sanitary sewer operation is an enterprise fund. What that means is it receives no funding from the tax levy or from the general fund. And so rates charged for water and sanitary sewer need to be sufficient to cover all costs, both operating and capital, as well as debt service. We use a rolling 5-year consumption average for budget forecasting and rate setting. And as a reminder, we have a blended rate for water. We have a fixed rate that's based on water meter size that is charged per quarter. And then we have a variable rate that is charged based on consumption. All non-residential accounts are assessed the same variable rate for all consumption for the quarter. But residential accounts have 3 tiers to the rate structure. So consumption up to 10,000 gallons in a quarter is assessed 1 fee. Consumption between 10 and 60,000 gallons for that quarter is charged a separate fee. And then a different rate for any residential consumption over 60,000 in a quarter. We set our rates in order to have a fixed rate of 20% total revenue, variable rate 80%. So that's our current model to set the rates to generate revenue, 20% from the fixed rate, 80% from the variable consumption fees. And then we have a long-term forecast for the water fund that projects a 2.5% increase in revenue per year to cover inflationary cost increases for the utility. Most of those are driven by personnel. We talked a couple weeks ago in the Finance Committee about the general trend nationwide of reduced water consumption. You can see specific to Lake Forest here, annual consumption on the left in million gallons going back several years. And then on the right side, what you see is 10-year water consumption average by month. So the thing to note there is that we have significant increases in water consumption during the summer, primarily due to irrigation. But you can see that the winter months are all fairly constant over the 10-year average of consumption. Because of the weather conditions in the summer of 2019, we are anticipating that the revenue in the water fund will be $650,000 under budget for the current fiscal year. We have mostly winter months remaining through April 30th, so we can be fairly certain of that budget variance within a relatively small deviation. And so the thing to note is that in the water fund, we do see significant budget variances up and down over time from year to year based on the summer weather. The rolling 5-year average that we're using for rate forecasting and budget modeling is shown on the chart to the left. And what you can see is that the general trend downward of consumption is reducing that rolling 5-year average on which the rates are set and the budget is forecast. So that downward pressure in consumption is requiring rate increases of more than 2.5% to generate the overall 2.5% increase in revenue that's needed for the long-term financial forecast. Going back to the fixed versus variable fee structure, the chart on the left shows the proportion of revenue for the past several fiscal years of variable versus fixed. In fiscal year 13, the city's rate structure was 9% of revenue was generated by the fixed rate and 91% was generated by the variable rate. And that's when the city council began to really study the rate structure and look at whether or not structural changes in the rates needed to be made. And so as a result, in fiscal year 15, there was a significant structural change to the rate structure in order to increase the proportion of revenue generated from the fixed rate and provide less volatility in the revenues overall from year to year. That rate structure was again amended in FY18. So those 2 years are called out with the asterisk and in red because those were two specific structural changes to the rate structure to again increase the proportion of revenue generally that was received from the fixed versus variable. I note that on the FY20 estimate there, we're projecting to come in at 22% fixed and 78% variable. That is not a structural change. We budgeted forecasting the 80-20, but because of the lower consumption forecasted for this year, the actual revenue is projected to come in a little differently than our 80-20 target. And then on the right side, we look at the primary considerations in the rate setting of fixed versus variable. So if we want to increase revenue stability and minimize weather fluctuations, that is driven more by the fixed rate. Whereas promoting water conservation or the consumer perception of equity is driven more by the variable rate, and cost recovery clearly can be achieved under both structures. We talked a little bit a few weeks ago at the January Finance Committee meeting about the water fund budget. And we talked about the fact that despite the fact that the revenue structure is 20% fixed, 80% variable, it is essentially inverse for the budgeted expenses. And so I just added this slide to kind of give you an overall picture of the FY20 budget for the Water and Sanitary Sewer Fund, and show how we allocate those between variable and fixed. And when we're doing this, what we assess is whether or not water consumption is going to impact that category of expenses. So for example, the personnel costs, the salaries and benefits of personnel in the water fund are all shown as fixed because we do not adjust staffing at the water plant between the winter and the summer. We're a 24/7 operation, and the staffing remains the same throughout the year despite what the water consumption is in any given month. We have some operating costs that are variable, but most of those are fixed. Electricity and chemicals are the two budgetary items that are directly proportional to consumption. So we will see those costs increase and decrease based on consumption across the year. Capital expenses, we've previously put that all in fixed. Here for this summary, I've split it, recognizing that some capital expenses can be deferred if revenue is short. That is certainly a policy decision that, particular water main replacements or other capital projects can be put on hold and deferred if necessary. And then debt service, of course, is 100% fixed. So we know what our outstanding bond obligations are for principal and interest, so we put that in fixed. So when you look at it overall, we, based on the FY20 budget, have about 87% of the costs being fixed and 13% variable. So in November, we had a discussion about water consumption, and at the time, staff recommended to increase the fixed rate from 20 to 25% overall to, again, better remove or better provide revenue stability marginally to the fund. And then also a Public Works recommendation to consider elimination of sprinkler-free Mondays. So that particular item will be reviewed and brought back as a result of a Public Works Committee discussion later in the coming months, I think February meeting maybe. And that will come back separately to the City Council for consideration. But as a result of that discussion, the committee asked that we look at ways to phase in the 20 to 25% adjustment, ways to mitigate the disproportionate impact to low volume consumers. So we talked about the fact that adjustments to fixed rates will impact lower usage consumers more than higher usage consumers. And then to also provide the City Council with some statistics regarding usage overall with city customers. So we looked at this. I won't go into detail, but this was the modeling that we did a few years ago when we began creating tiers in the residential rate structure. Initially, we had 2 tiers. And we benchmarked that based on this data at 60,000 on average. So 60,000 over 4 is 240,000 gallons. So we were looking to differentiate the rate between those who were over and under 60,000 per quarter. And we had those 2 rates beginning May 1st of 14. And then for fiscal year 18, May 1 of 17, we did some more structural changes to increase the fixed rate, shift to 80-20, and we created a Tier 1, which was specifically designed to mitigate the impact to low usage consumers because that rate was actually dropped. And that was intended to show a proportionate decrease in the variable rate commensurate with the increase in the fixed rate. So this just provides a history of the water rates. Again, I've highlighted in red the 2 years where we made structural changes, 15 and 18. What you see here in the 18 change, we saw the $10 increase per quarter to the small consumer, which is almost all, about 95% of the total customers fall in this small category, with a drop of about $1 per 1,000 gallon. With the thought that that was negating that impact to the low volume consumers. In other years, we've done generally across the board increases, sometimes adjusting the fixed, not always, but having an emphasis on the variable rates, keeping pace with inflation. So this slide is the slide we looked at January 21st. This presented 3 separate options. It provides the number of accounts in each of the 3 categories for fixed and the number of accounts in each of the categories for variable consumption, what our current rates were, and three different options that would accomplish the same goal of generating 2.5% in increased revenue, but would get there differently. So option one was more of an across-the-board change that would keep the structure at 20% fixed, 80% variable. Option two was moving to the 25-75, so putting a heavier weight on the increased on the fixed rate side than the variable. And then option three being midway between option one and option two, so getting to 22.5 and 77.5, but minimizing that larger percentage increase on the fixed rate side. So again, they will all generate overall the same amount of revenue. It's just how it's distributed to consumers. And what this does, this adds at the bottom an annual dollar and percentage impact to different categories of consumers. So again, you have a low usage residential. You have about 1,500 of the nearly 7,000 accounts in that category. Under each of the three options, annual impacts of $19, $46, and $27. So again, with three being kind of the middle option between one and two, and then similar percentage and dollar amount adjustments to medium usage residential, high usage commercial, and average usage commercial. The note here of the 317 non-residential accounts are being assessed the same variable rate for all consumption that they're using. They don't have tiered rates like the residential accounts. So based on the conversation on January 21st, the Finance Committee asked us to bring back the ordinance under option three, which is more of a phased-in change. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So we have that before you this evening. So option three is what is included in the ordinance before you for first reading. We'll take your input and bring back on February 18th a final ordinance for approval. Just a couple additional bits of information based on questions received. This is a recycled slide. This is a slide that we presented when we were doing the previous structure changes. And what we did was we surveyed a number of communities, surrounding communities, to look at the rate modeling and what their overall average rate was. So this data is not updated, but the important part is down here at the bottom. And so for any community that had an F after it, they are assessing a fixed rate in addition to a variable rate, very similar to the Lake Forest model. Mm-hmm. Where you see a community with an M after it, they are all variable rate, but they assess a minimum usage. And that's how they get to their fixed rate amount, is by saying, we're going to charge everybody the same rate, but you're going to be charged at least 5,000 or 10,000 gallons per billing period. And so they accomplish it differently from their rate setting. The only two communities at the time that were truly, purely variable was Winnetka and Highland Park. So I followed up with them as to what they've done since 2015. Winnetka has moved to a fixed and variable rate structure, fixed based on meter usage size, so they are very similar to Lake Forest in structure. Highland Park has remained variable, but they now have tiered rates. So they have 3 tiers as well, but they are, of the comparables here, the only community now still purely variable in a rate structure. And then the last slide is, we have had a question over time as to whether or not meter size correlates to water consumption. So is meter size a reasonable basis for the fixed rate? And so this is just an analysis we had done a few years ago showing the meter size, what category they're in, small, medium, and large, the count of accounts, the percentage of the total, the percentage of the total for the category, and the average consumption for the accounts in that bucket. So at the time when we did this analysis, we came back and we felt, yes, based on the analysis, especially for small and medium, meter size is appropriate and is probably the reason why many communities that have a fixed rate are using it, meter size. there is no reason why it can only be 3 categories. So I would suggest that, if it's the desire of the council for next year, we can go back and do more analysis as to whether or not there should be 5 tiers instead of 3 based on the fixed rate. Because you do see a significant difference between the 5/8 inch and 3/4 inch compared to the 1 and 1.5 inch when you look at consumption. But they're all being assessed the same fixed rate. So based on that, I will be happy to answer any additional questions.
Alderman Marino?
On the forecasted demand, I certainly appreciate that it's declining, but I do believe that it approaches a level and stabilizes. I don't think the rate of decrease continues. So I would ask that, not for this analysis this month, but in the future, I would suggest that the rolling 5-year average in particular shows a dramatic decline over time. And I think that demand function needs to be understood better, maybe broken down into its component parts. And I know I've seen that analysis in the past. We talk a lot about sprinkler consumption, but I think it's going to become more important for us to understand the demand function better in the future. I don't think that it continues to decline, and that certainly will impact pricing.
Right. So on this chart, you're suggesting that this will eventually level out,
Yes.
that it won't, yes, and I agree. And we just need to
Understand it. That's all.
keep analyzing that to see when that happens. You'll see, so for this fiscal year, we're projecting the lowest of this entire time period. I think that goes back to 2000, can't read my own chart. 2009?
2009, yeah.
Yeah. And then 2013 was the very unique, very hot, dry summer of 2012, where we saw the highest ever consumption for that year. But yes, to your point, we do, yes, continue to monitor this. We actually graph this and chart this every month. And so we're actually, it's a very busy graph, but kind of watching trends. It's very interesting to see how these winter months have stayed relatively constant. They've decreased a little bit, which I think is more the plumbing type of issues where, that's just conserving water, the showers, the different plumbing appliances that are really built to conserve water. And then a lot of it is just driven by weather during the summer. Hard to predict, but.
Alderman Bushman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to expand a little bit more, because I had a similar thought, and I was using the word maybe we're plateauing in terms of the consumption, and 2 factors there. One you're referring to from a residential standpoint. I think we've driven the needle down to where we have the 1.6, 1.2 flushable toilets, the shower heads. I'm not sure, I know for myself, I'm not sure what more I can do from a homeowner standpoint. So we may see a plateauing there. Plus, in terms of the city, I'd like to think that maybe we have some growth in us from Kelmscott, Wesley Farms, McKinley, certainly the Hyatt Place, that we may be seeing even a reversal there. But I'd like to think that hopefully we're at a plateau type level. If I could ask you to go back to the variable fee schedule structure that had the considerations on it. And this is where I guess I still struggle a bit with. Certainly understand that, the more you put on the fixed component, the more stability you have in terms of revenue generation. If you went 100% fixed, it's no question what sort of consumption you'd have. But you do have the other considerations here, and I think they're very good considerations, and I think we all really do like to promote water conservation. We do feel it's important for the equity side of the equation, the consumer perception. And what we've talked about on that corollary issue is, the low usage user, and that could well equate to the low income resident or family, and trying to mitigate or avoid, unnecessary burdens placed upon them, recognizing that the person that doesn't want to have high consumption with regular use of sprinklers in the summer versus the person that's more conservative. I think we should recognize that. All these equations end up with the bottom line, same cost recovery, and that is important being an enterprise fund. But if you look at what we're talking about here, even at the 2.5% switch from the variable to the fixed, you're still putting the greatest burden on the low-income user. You're talking about over 6% increase in their rates. And I looking at all the different considerations, I guess I still feel, why do we have to move off of there? Why can't we stay at the 80-20? I think we have these other considerations that I would encourage us all to consider, and whether we really need to go this additional step at this point in time.
Thank you. Alderman Kashkarian?
First off, Elizabeth, thank you very much again for bringing this back. I know it seems somewhat dry, no pun intended, but this is something I think that as we talk about any straight rate structure change, that it's something that the public should be made aware of, and frequently, just in the sake of transparency, and thank you again for presenting it back to us. The undeniable fact to me as I look at it, and I'll be honest with you, Alderman Bushman, I initially was in agreement with you initially when it was first presented, but as I looked at all of these variables, and specifically the fixed cost categories in terms of our IT, our fleet maintenance, our building, our debt service, I mean, these are all costs that we have to share as a community, at least on some level. And although it may be a slightly increased burden, I think we saw the dollar amount was not an onerous amount. And so I think it's a reasonable ask. We don't all use police protection, although they're always out there for us. We don't always use a rescue unit from the fire department, although they're always there at our need and our call. I think this needs to be viewed, even though it's an enterprise fund, I get that, but we have to kind of start blending these and thinking of them similarly. I do agree that we do need to monitor this moving forward, and I'll be curious to see what our sister communities do over the next 3, 4, 5 years. I know the mayor and I had talked about, the climate is, we're seeing different weather patterns, and that certainly is going to impact usage, but what climate's not going to impact, though, is all those fixed costs that we have that are just inescapable. And again, in the sake of transparency, I think it's worth it that every resident does hear that, and you certainly have been very diligent in presenting all sides, and I respect Alderman Bushman for what he's saying. But going back to last month's meeting, I would tend to agree with Alderman Preschlack that blended would be the most appropriate approach to it. And one of the other things I do want to bring up is on our water bills, that this isn't the only thing. Obviously, we have 2 other items that do appear on that water bill. And I'm going to look back at previous councils and acknowledge their hard work and their thoughtfulness, because I can say it, only having sat in this seat for 9 months, I think that putting a sanitation fee on there on a quarterly basis was appropriate, as well as the public safety pension fee, which I think previous councils had done, and not to give them a shout out, but I'm going to give them a shout out. And I think it was a very appropriate thing to do to make our residents aware of the cost of running this city. And it's something that I think it's more appropriate to come forward on a bill where they do see it rather than burying it in the budget somewhere. And it makes them aware of our obligations. And if we had our druthers, we wouldn't pay any of it, but this is the cost of living in a community like Lake Forest. And I think we have to acknowledge it. And again, I can't speak highly enough in terms of what previous councils have done in terms of their fiscal responsibility and their willingness to share all of these hard decisions and these hard numbers with the residents. And I would commend all those that came before us. So again, you know, as we have it before us now, I think I'm most in favor of that.
Other comments? Alderman Morris?
Sure. I'm a big believer in data, and you have to look at the data that we've got and make your decisions about what we're going to do here. We can talk about what might come, and future city council members will be able to adjust this as an annual event. They can adjust the future when they get new data that maybe suggests that the rate, the consumption is going back up. So I would say for a modest increase, it gives us a little more conservative approach to managing the enterprise fund, and I think that makes sense. There's one other thing. In 2024, a big substantial portion of our debt service comes off. So the councils in 2024 and beyond will be able to really reevaluate the rate structure all over again, given the fact that that debt service is now being removed. So that's coming down the road as well. So I think this is the right way to go.
Good point. Other comments?
I would agree as well. I think that certainly all of us want to reward low consumption. But when you look at the actual numbers, it's just not that great a burden. And that's kind of where I come out on it. And there is certainly a need with all of those fixed costs to recoup a certain amount of revenue. So that's why I come out there also. If it were a larger number, I might think differently about it, but that's where I come out.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anybody from the public? I'm sorry,
Could I
Alderman
have a
Bushman.
point of clarification on
Another bite at the
what's
apple.
been said? I appreciate the input from my fellow aldermen. You know, we had talked about this maybe being the first step of going to a 25-75, but I've heard some comments made that, you know, we should take it a step at a time. So, you know, would we have an understanding in this vote that this is, you know, what we're saying now, you know, to go to the 22.5, looking to the future to be based upon, as Alderman Morris said, look at the data at that point in time and make a judgment, not view this as, you know, the first step that we're going to take a second step to take it up to the 25-75. And if so, I can go along with the rest of the council on this.
Okay. Other thoughts?
No, I think that's fair.
Any member of the public that would like to comment on this matter before us? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to grant first reading to the proposed ordinance.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second?
And this is a roll call vote?
Alderman Beidler?
Aye.
Alderman Morris?
Aye.
Alderman Notes?
Aye.
Alderman Rummel?
Aye.
Alderman Preschlack?
Aye.
Alderman Gushgarian?
Aye.
Alderman Moreno?
Aye.
Alderman Bushman?
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is an opportunity for citizens to address the city council on non-agenda items. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak to the council about something that is not on our agenda tonight, please identify yourself. Okay, seeing none, I would move on to items for omnibus vote consideration. Before I read these items for omnibus vote consideration, I'd like to take a moment and talk about the 3 resolutions of sympathy that we have tonight. First, Vinnie Dolan passed away on January 22nd. Vinnie was an active volunteer in the community for many years, including service on the city's zoning board of appeals when I was the chairman. I worked extensively with Vinnie. He was reliable, he was thoughtful, he was good at building consensus. He was just the model board member, and he was a really pleasure to work with. He was also especially committed to the American Legion McKinlock Post 264, and for about the last 20 years was the lead person in organizing the Lake Forest Day Parade and celebrations. So Vinnie had been a great contributor to our community, and he will be missed, and his family has our sympathies. Second, Ron Boehm served the city for 33 years, retiring in 1990 as the city engineer. Ron was a longtime active member of Faith Lutheran Church in Lake Forest. He was also an avid golfer, and Deer Path was his club. Ron passed away on January 17th. And then lastly, Byron Praise served the city for 28 years, retiring as the Director of Building and Zoning. Byron worked on many local landmark construction projects, including the beach renovation project in the 1980s and the 2 train stations. He was a Gorton board member and volunteered for many other local groups in Lake Forest. And Byron passed away on January 23rd. So our condolences go out to the families of these 3 valued and dedicated Lake Foresters. We have 8 items for omnibus vote consideration tonight. First is a resolution of sympathy for former Zoning Board of Appeals member and Lake Forest Day Parade organizer Vincent P. Dolan. Second is resolution of sympathy for former city engineer Ronald Boehm. Third is resolution of sympathy for former Building and Zoning Department Director Byron Praise. Fourth is approval of the January 21st, 2020 City Council meeting minutes. Fifth is approval of the check register for the period of December 28th, 2019 to January 24th, 2020. Sixth is the approval of ordinances abating 2019 tax levies for various general obligation alternate revenue bond issues. This would be a final approval. Seventh is consideration of a recommendation from staff to authorize reimbursement to Lake Forest Open Lands Association for plantings in the Middle Fork Savanna. It's an approval by motion. And eighth is consideration of an ordinance approving a recommendation from the Zoning Board of Appeals, first reading, and if desired by the City Council, final approval. Is there any item that any member of the council would like to remove or have taken separately? Okay, there being none, I would entertain a motion to approve the 8 omnibus items as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Alderman Beidler?
Aye.
Alderman Morris?
Aye.
Alderman Notes?
Aye.
Alderman Rummel?
Aye.
Alderman Preschlack?
Aye.
Alderman Gashgarian?
Aye.
Alderman Moreno?
Aye.
Alderman Bushman?
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay, motion carries.
Thank you. Next item is ordinances. Consideration of a recommendation from the Plan Commission in support of tentative and final approval of the Margaret M. and Hampton M. Swift Memorial Planned Preservation Subdivision and approval of the associated special use permit. If desired by the council, waive first reading and grant final approval of the ordinance. Kathy Cerniak will be bringing us up to speed on this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This petition comes to you with a 6-0 vote recommendation in support from the Plan Commission. Want to give you a little bit of background. The property is 3.8 acres. It is located close to the Central Business District, the library, the new McKinley Road development. Washington Road borders the property on the east side. Walnut and Triangle Park border the property on the south side, and Westminster is just to the north. Just a little bit of background. This 3.8 acre property and the home that was previously on it was the Swift family home for many decades, and actually one of the 13 Swift siblings, Stuart Swift, is here with us tonight. It was a very unique property. Many people recognized it. Many people wondered about that large property and saw that house up on the hill. It's a unique property because of its size, because of its location within walking distance to the Central Business District, and because of its topography. Lake Forest is pretty flat, but this property, especially if you walk up on it, you're surprised at the change in grade on the property. The property is in the historic district, the East Side Historic, Local Historic District. It is also within the Historic Residential and Open Space Preservation District, which is an overlay district which allows subdivisions, which allows the gives the Plan Commission and City Council flexibility with subdivisions to not follow the minimum lot size exactly, to not follow the setbacks, to really be a bit creative as you look at properties, specifically to preserve historic resources or environmental resources. I also think this petition is a really good example of your boards and commissions really looking at the specific facts of a particular property, being creative, and really being open-minded. I believe that 5 years ago, this subdivision would not have been before you. When the Swift family, when the Swift siblings first came forward, we talked about the property. We talked about the fact that the property, as I said, is in the local historic district. The fact that the house was designated as a contributing structure in the historic district. And the family initially tried to market the property as a 3-point-acre property with the existing house. We had follow-up discussions with the family, with their attorney, with the realtor, and decided that after looking at the house and really not just simply taking it at face value that it was labeled as a contributing structure. Contributing structures are those that are 50 years old or older in the historic district, but really taking the time to look at the house specifically. The property owners had a historic assessment done, fully documented the house so that we would have a record for our archives, and also did a structural report on the house. The Historic Preservation Commission looked at the request that was then brought before them for demolition of the house very carefully. And certainly they heard opposing testimony to the demolition, specifically because it was an old house in the historic district. But the Historic Preservation Commission really drilled down deeply in this case and walked the site and understood that this house had been significantly modified over the course of many years, that there had been at least 2 fires in the house that resulted in some significant alterations, that there had been multiple additions, and really recognized that the historic integrity of this particular house had been lost. And really what was of most value to the city was the property itself. And I know that piece isn't before you, but I think that's important background as you think through and understand how the boards and commissions do think about these properties. So again, just a little bit more to give you a sense of the property. Washington Road is here, Walnut is here, Triangle Park. You see the development around it. Interestingly, the properties immediately to the west are zoned R1. Minimum lot size is about 9,700 square feet, much smaller lots than is allowed on this property, R3. And these properties in this area are zoned R3, minimum lot size of 40,000 square feet, about an acre. As you move a little bit further away, we get into our R4 zoning, our acre and a half, which is most of the east side. Again, just a photo of the house. If you look at it quickly and look at it sitting on the hill, it's easy to say that's significant, we should never tear it down. But the Historic Preservation Commission, as they do, really looked at this and understood that they need to be selective about what should be preserved. And then once something is identified as being very significant and important to the community, then they need to be fierce about preserving it. But in this case, they made the decision that the house should come down, and the house did come down. The property was then marketed as a 3.8-acre property, and that too didn't attract buyers. So again, after conversations with the family came forward with a proposal to subdivide the property. As I mentioned, this property is zoned R3. The subdivision that the Plan Commission recommended to you is fully in compliance with the code provisions, and in fact, in some respects, exceeds the minimum requirements for subdivisions in this area. The lot sizes all exceed 40,000 square feet. I believe the smallest lot is 40,500, and the largest lot about 43,700. The setbacks, the Plan Commission heard clearly that the streetscape preservation of key groupings of trees were very important. So the front yard setbacks along Washington Road exceed the 40-foot front yard setback. Those setbacks range from about 90 feet to about 140 feet, so they don't slightly exceed that 40-foot setback, but significantly exceed that to preserve the unique topography of the site and to preserve significant groupings of trees. As we looked at the property, as the Plan Commission looked at the property, as the petitioner's arborist and the city arborist walked the property, there are many trees on the property, but again, rather than just taking the site at face value, the Plan Commission understood that a number of the trees are actually in failing condition. So really sorting through, identifying the key healthy groupings of trees, assuring that those are saved as the property's developed, but recognizing that trees that are in poor condition, it doesn't make sense to modify or work around those. The Plan Commission in its recommendation to you does recommend 3 groupings of trees for preservation. I'll point those out in just a moment. Prohibits site obscuring fences within the front yard setback. Again, in response to what they heard from the neighbors, really preserving the streetscape and views into the property. And the conditions which are recommended to appear as notes on the plat also limit curb cuts. For the center 2 lots, those lots are limited to a single curb cut, although they would be allowed by the code to have a double curb cut. And there is some flexibility, some additional flexibility in how close those curb cuts can be to the property line. Again, recognizing that we're balancing tree preservation, streetscape preservation, but also the need to give the buyers of these properties some options. I will note that at least from what I have heard and the calls we have received, interest in these properties is very high. I expect that with your approval, as we work with the petitioners to finalize this plat, take it to the county for recording, you will see closings on at least some of these properties very quickly. The subdivision as proposed, again, Washington Road, Walnut, Triangle Park is down in this location, 4 lots. The Plan Commission appropriately considered whether this property should be developed in an alternative way, whether there should be clustered lots, whether there should be townhomes. The Plan Commission heard loudly from property owners in the area that they felt that this property in this location in an established neighborhood was appropriately developed with the 4 lots as allowed by the zoning code. But to the Plan Commission's credit, they took a number of hours to discuss alternatives. In this area, you see the increased setbacks. The tree groupings are in the northeast corner of this lot, are in generally this area of this lot, and in this area of this lot. So much to work with, but interestingly, the potential buyers who have contacted city staff about these lots are attracted to these lots because of the unique topography, because of the trees, and importantly, because of their location within an established neighborhood and within walking distance to the train station and the central business district, the library, Gorton Community Center, the college. They're in a prime location. So with that, the Plan Commission did recommend approval of a 4-lot subdivision as presented to you. Because this is in the overlay district, the approval is done by ordinance. You have an ordinance in your packet beginning on page 59, I believe. So if you choose to do so, it would be appropriate to waive first reading of that ordinance, grant final approval, and then we would proceed to work with the petitioner and finalize the plat. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the council? Alderman Morris.
Just a comment. I live pretty close here, and I've walked by the Swift property for decades. And with the death of Mrs. Swift, I've always assumed that something like this would be appropriate, given where that property is in the neighborhood around it. It'll have a big impact on the neighborhood, but it's impressive that the family has worked as well as it has with the city staff to come up with a solution. So I'm pretty happy about this.
Alderman Beidler.
As the other Ward 1 alderman, I would say the same thing. This isn't quite as close to where I live as it is to where Jed lives, but it's very much in the center of town. So it's rare that I wouldn't go past this lot at least once a day when I'm in town. And I think everybody in the neighborhood was had strong feelings that it be done well. That said, I think both the neighbors and frankly all residents of Lake Forest have long been praising the flexibility that we are now showing in terms of uses for some of these properties that are coming online. And frankly, in this area, it's hard to even imagine another property with 4 acres coming on. This is very unusual. And I'm really delighted by the process that's happened. Again, I would praise the Swift family. It's always hard. This is a family homestead for a long time, where the children grew up. I'm sure many grandchildren occasion there with their grandparents. It's a big deal to have your homestead become something else. But I think this will honor the value that this family has brought to the community, longtime residents. And I just feel like it's a really wonderful direction for us to be going. I'm thrilled that the Plan Commission put so much time into it. Makes it a lot easier for us when our boards and commissions do the very serious legwork. But all around, I think the process is to be praised, and I think the result's thrilling. And frankly, I'm really excited to see what gets built there, because I think it's going to be a wonderful and very rare opportunity to be able to build residences in this kind of location.
Any other comments? Alderman Rummel?
Kathy, can you just give us an idea? So these would be, when you say square footage of the lot, that doesn't mean that much to me. I'm sorry. Does that mean quarter acre, half acre, approximately? And about what size home can be built on those lots?
The lots, 43,560 is an acre, so the lots are, 3 of them are just under an acre, 1 is a little over an acre. So home sizes, 4,000, 5,000 square feet. Interesting, again, some of the potential buyers that I've talked to are actually talking about homes that may not maximize. I think the attraction to these lots is really the historic nature of the property and the environmental, the views to Triangle Park, but about 5,000 square feet. And that isn't necessarily footprint. Our building scale does calculate volume of the house.
Alderman Notes?
Putting on my building review board hat, you mentioned that there's a lot of topography on the site. As you were identifying the setbacks, did you take into account siting the house within that topography and accessing it with a driveway through the trees you're trying to work around and all that?
Yes, very much. And that did lead to some of the setbacks in this area, recognizing that this is the high part of the property, and the opportunity to really preserve the slope as you move down to Triangle Park by locating the structures up above. And certainly, as you know, Building Review Board, Historic Preservation Commission, they really do work with the petitioners to try and preserve existing grades to the extent possible using good engineering practices. We certainly want drainage to work. This site, there will be, utilities will be constructed, sanitary sewer and water need to be extended. Storm sewers will be extended as needed, but certainly the topography on the property and the extent of open space will allow a great deal of pervious surface on these lots.
Thank you, Kathy.
Other comments? Alderman Murillo?
And the immediate neighbors are generally in favor of this design. Is that?
Yes. The closest neighbors were concerned about looking at an alternative product, a clustering or a townhome or something that would actually involve a zone change. The Plan Commission heard clearly that because this property is really within an established neighborhood, that subdivision consistent as a convention, essentially a conventional subdivision, consistent with the zoning is something that the neighbors support. No one's ever 100% happy, but this outcome really seemed to have considerable support from the neighbors.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Anybody from the public who'd like to speak to the council on this matter? Okay, hearing no further comments, I would entertain a motion to waive first reading and grant final approval of an ordinance granting tentative and final approval of the Margaret M. and Hampton M. Swift Planned Preservation Subdivision and approval of the associated special use permit as recommended by the Plan Commission.
So moved.
Second.
This is a roll call vote.
Alderman Beidler?
Aye.
Alderman Morris?
Aye.
Alderman Notes?
Aye.
Alderman Rommel?
Aye.
Alderman Preschlack?
Aye.
Alderman Kashgarian?
Aye.
Alderman Moreno?
Aye.
Alderman Bushman?
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Next item on the agenda is consideration of an ordinance amending Chapter 110 of the City Code regarding permits and fees for special event and commercial filming requests. This is a first reading, and it's going to be presented by Layla Werner, our administrative intern.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. This evening, I'm going to be presenting to you a consideration of an ordinance amending Chapter 110 of the City Code. This might look familiar. I know you guys saw something related to this last week, or 2 weeks ago. So what this proposed ordinance and code amendment is it's basically, instead of amending anything related to landscape or raffle licenses, this is more specifically related to special events and commercial filming. So around August of 2019, when we were conducting our annual review of the policies that are adopted by the city manager, we realized that the code amendments didn't align with the city manager authority and our current practices. Again, kind of similar to what you guys saw 2 weeks ago. So what this is going to do is kind of strengthen our policies and procedures related to the permitting process, specifically holding the permittee accountable for any kind of special event or commercial filming that they conduct in the city. So I am going to kind of go over what the policy for commercial filming specifically is stating, as well as proposing our fee structure that we're bringing here tonight to go on the annual fee ordinance. So before I go any further, I would just like to give you some background on the current commercial filming environment. So again, like I said, we did our annual review back in August, and city staff realized that we have got more complex commercial filming applications, and it's taken a lot more one-on-one time with the people who are coming in for these applications. In 2018, there were only about 3 commercial filming permit applications, and that jumped to 5 in 2019. The city currently only charges a $25 application fee, which doesn't even cover an hourly, meeting that we have been having with these candidates. As I stated, these permits have become more complex, and usually we do have to have a meeting one-on-one with the applicant. It can include any member of the executive staff, police, fire. And while the city does also get funds from, if there is any additional city personnel that's used, such as police and fire, again, for all of the effort that does go into approving these permits, it's only that $25 application fee. So again, kind of moving into the policy itself, this is kind of going to allow city staff to have a more extensive review process. One of the things that we are proposing in the policy that you actually will be seeing in May when it's presented with the other administrative directives is the 25 business days prior to the date of filming, we will require an in-person meeting or any type of communication with that applicant. You will see that when I get to the fee structure, we kind of have a tiered structure of the different classes of film. And so if you're a lower classification of film, you don't necessarily need to have an in-person meeting, but we still do want some kind of communication from the applicant that they will be submitting this application. And just something kind of cool, little homework for you guys to do. It's actually shared on the city's Facebook page. Yesterday at the Super Bowl, there was a commercial that was filmed, and while it was only about 20 seconds of Carly Lloyd kicking, I think, a field goal, it was actually filmed at Hallis Hall. So it doesn't necessarily show what we do from the city staff's perspective, but it does show a background of just what goes into the commercial filming process and how it really impacts the community and what goes around in the surrounding area. So now I am going to move into the fee structure that we're proposing. As I stated earlier, there's the 3 different classes of film. We have a Class A, a Class B, and a Class C permit. Each permit does specifically state the scale and scope of what we're expecting from an application. So for a Class A permit, that's going to be a really big, extensive project that you'll see city staff reviewing. And so that would be any closure of a public roadway, access of a 12-hour usage of city personnel, again, police and fire. So we're proposing a tiered application fee as well as a permit cost and a refundable security deposit. So going back to that proposed application fee, that's going to cover that initial meeting one-on-one with the applicant. If that includes executive staff or any other administrative staff, that's again covering that hourly cost. The proposed permit cost is tiered, and what that's covering is the cost of how long it takes to review the application, how many different staff members it gets disseminated to, and different departments that do have to go through this review process. And then the security deposit is more based on if there's any infrastructure damage or anything that happens that you don't want to be held accountable for a pothole that could have been fixed with a security deposit. And then on top of this, we will still be charging for any other city personnel, again, police and fire, that's used. So that's not going away. This is just additional charges for, again, the city staff review that kind of goes into this. So again, the action requested is the passage of an ordinance amending Chapter 110 of the City Code to align city manager authority with our current policies and practices. And I'll answer any questions.
Alderman Goshgarian?
Where do these application costs and permit costs stand in alignment with some of the other North Shore communities that have obviously filming occurring on them?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually had a survey, and it was kind of a bunch of the neighboring communities kind of putting forth what their application costs were, and ours was by far the lowest application cost. And I don't think that's very competitive if we do want to have more people coming to film here, especially because Lake Forest is so beautiful. A lot of people do want to come here and film, and I think it's important to realize that if another application fee in a community is $100 and we're only $25, yes, that gives them the incentive to want to come here, but they expect so much out of the city staff, and the staff is just not getting that time back for the amount of time that goes into the review process. And I'd be more than happy to share those survey results with you as well.
And I guess my question is, are we undervaluing what we have? And again, not being an expert in this field whatsoever, but it seems to me they're choosing a site and saying that's where I want to go. What does it cost? I can't imagine that fee is swaying anybody one way or the other, but I certainly don't want to give away our valuable services and time of our highly trained staff.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going off of your question, there are a lot of people that do go around, they scout out venues. So it's kind of important when, they do come to Lake Forest and they see, like I said, such a gorgeous venue, and then they see what we're charging, and, maybe they could use that as they want to come in here because we're not charging so much. But the city of Chicago also does a tiered film structure, and it's a very competitive price. And I think that if we kind of also get into that competitive market, we could get a lot of people to want to conduct commercial filming here.
I would say to your point, Alderman Goshgarian, though, the goal in presenting this recommendation was truly just cost recovery for staff time, not looking to generate any additional revenue off of that, and that's why it's structured the way it is. And we feel pretty confident that, as proposed, this should do a sufficient job of recovering those costs.
Okay.
Alderman Notes?
Does the permit fee impact, or is it impacted at all by number of days or shooting or different locations throughout the city if they're shooting in 3 different parts of town? Or?
So we didn't go that far in depth. There are a lot of other communities that do have a permit cost based on the amount of days, but we just did it on the amount of hours that are spent reviewing the actual application itself, and not specifically where you're filming in town. This is something that is new for us, so we'd be more than happy to review it in the future, but this is kind of just the first step before anything else is to happen.
Alderman Rummel?
Can you just give me like an example of the Class C film permit? I just want to be sure that we're not trapping some well-intentioned, semi-professional people here who, for whom that might be a burden to, maybe students who are coming in. Would that qualify? I could see high school students, college students, students maybe from Northwestern who want to come in and film, would they fall under this classification of a commercial film and be assessed a fee? I'm just trying to, I just don't want to.
Definitely. So we did
trap
actually
amateurs.
discuss that while we were reviewing this, and the idea of a commercial film, I actually do have the definition that we kind of have been working with, and it's a digital or film recording by a person, business, or other entity for a market audience such as a documentary, television, or feature film, advertisement, or similar project. So it's not necessarily going to impact somebody who's maybe doing an art project and they're going around taking pictures for photography or anything. So we're not trying to, kind of like how you said, trap anybody into paying for a permit. It's more for any commercial filming company that would be interested, or a small company that would be interested in filming in Lake Forest.
So if I'm a student and I'm doing a documentary for a class, I'm not going to be assessed a fee?
Well, and again, it does depend on the scale and scope. As you can kind of see, it says no closure of a public property or no use of a public roadway. So it can be filmed on private property, but if they do want to use any city services such as parking or anything else that has to do with that, where they would need city staff to help coordinate, is when that would come into play.
Yeah, so I see that, so then my student would come under the Class C permit and have to pay a fee, is what you're saying?
Not
So
if it's,
it-
it's got to be commercial.
It
Well,
depends.
that's why I'm
Yeah. So
asking.
it just depends on, again, if they come and talk to any member of city staff at City Hall and kind of explain what they're doing, we're more than happy to help them through the process. But again, if they don't need city coordination, that's when it would be a discussion between city staff on how they would move forward with the Class C
And maybe the
permit.
fee would be waived altogether because they aren't a commercial film. Would that?
So it would be something that city staff would discuss. I'm more than happy to kind of look more into that and discuss with the rest of the staff that did go through this review process and get back to you on that.
Yeah, well,
So I-
yeah.
I think in that scenario, it wouldn't be a waiving of the fee, it simply wouldn't require a permit.
So there would be no fee?
Well, yeah,
right,
correct,
Right,
yes.
right. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to determine. So maybe if we kind of define that further or
Further define
state that
commercial.
explicitly, that,
Sure.
I don't know how you would do it, but that
We can further define,
academic projects or projects originating for an academic purpose, I don't know how you'd phrase it. but-
Non-commercial,
Yeah,
not for profit.
non-commercial, not-for-profit, yeah, yeah.
and we can further define that in the policy to ensure that commercial is as intended and as discussed here for, well, really for the entities that Layla already laid out.
Alderman Beidler.
Layla, what happens when some filming is done in a private residence? Does the film company still come to the city to get permits, or how does that work?
Right, so kind of going back to what Alderman Rummel was asking, it just depends on if they need any city staff to coordinate, if they are going to be parking on the street.
And if it's a commercial, I mean, years ago, there was a James Bond film next to our house. And we had a babysitter who was very fond of Roger Moore. And she did a lot of walking with our youngest child to see if she would get a chance to see Roger Moore, which I think she did. I
remember that,
Do you remember
actually.
that?
Yes.
But so, I mean, I realize that was a different time and probably a completely different structure. But would the city have gotten involved in that contract between whatever filming company included, was doing the James Bond movie and our neighbors, or how would that
Yeah,
work?
definitely. Again, this is something that we can outline in the policy, but it really has to do with any city staff coordination if they're going to be using any police or fire, and that's kind of how it would be determined and regulated. Just because a Class C film permit is the lower of the tiers and it doesn't require any use of city personnel, but again, it's more for the coordination of the actual filming project that is going on.
I mean, I can't imagine, I mean, my babysitter ogled the whole process with a baby buggy, but I think there was increased traffic and stuff that happened. I mean, it seemed like no matter what's happening, if a commercial film is being filmed, even on a fairly substantial lot with private property, that's got to impact, the city in some, you'd think that the police would want to know. For
Definitely,
example,
yeah.
the city would want to know. So I don't even remember hearing about our film classifications before, so it's a good thing, I think, that we're doing this.
Alderman Morris?
Just a question, and I don't know if this is Director Holub or Jason, but once they've gotten a permit and they're actually going to work, and they're using fire and police, so I assume we have some direct cost that we assess that for. But in general, how do you price that all out? Because there's a lot of disruption. It's not just the direct hours that are employed in this event. How do we bill for that?
Well, I can say specific to police and fire personnel, or police personnel, which is really the one that is predominantly used for traffic control or whatever else it may be. We do have specially defined special duty rates of pay that we assess by the hour. So we do an effective job of recovering our costs. But again, and the permit fee structure isn't necessarily meant to, again, recoup those added costs of personnel when the filming is ongoing. This is really meant just in terms of processing the initial application.
Is there a disruption to the community fee? I mean, this reference I can notice, they were doing that filming, they had Western closed, and people were having to go all kinds of different directions, and
So again, that would go along with the different classifications of film. So that if it does require a closure of a roadway, that would be
I understand that part,
Class A
but
film.
just after it's been granted, and now they're here, and they're creating a lot of disruption in some of these situations. Do we get any benefit from that?
Sure. Well, Community Development Director Zerniak just informed me. I haven't been here for one of these larger filming processes to know, but we have, I guess, in the past, entered into special agreements with whatever production company it may be for some of the larger scale events that will be more disruptive to the community. So that would occur separate and beyond just the permit fee.
Perfect.
I'm sorry I opened up this can of worms, sorry, Mayor. But I would respond to Jed's comments, so I'm sure although there is some disruption, there is also some economic benefit to the community, not to be diminished.
And for a point of clarification, we're not allowing anybody to be here for days on end. The policy does outline a specific deadline of how many days, how many hours a person is allowed to film, have a commercial filming event going on in the city. So it's, they're not going to be here for months on end.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Alderman Marie.
Thank you. I see this as a great opportunity for a little excitement. And so I recognize that there's disruption. I recognize there's a cost. But I also, I see in the city of Chicago quite often that they are enabling and encouraging filmmakers to come in and to use city assets and disrupt our lives. And it's fun. And I hate that I have to drive around the block or whatever I might have to do, but it's really fun. So I question if we are considering any kind of marketing of this offering, because I would love to see the Roger Moores of the world. And my sister-in-law's brother-in-law is a documentary filmmaker, and he had the good fortune of meeting astronaut Lovell at Lovells and filming him, doing a documentary on-site, impromptu, and it was fun.
Yeah.
And it's probably as close as I'll ever come to a movie star, or something famous or something filmed. And it was really exciting. So I hope that as we think about this, as we experience this, that we consider marketing this, because we live in a phenomenal place, and I'm sure that others would love to record it and present it in their own fashion. So I hope that we will take a different course with this, an exciting and proactive one.
Good thoughts. Other observations, comments? Okay. Anybody from the public that would like to speak to the council about this? Okay, there being none, I would entertain a motion to approve an ordinance amending Chapter 110 of the City Code regarding permits and fees for special event and commercial filming requests. This is first reading.
Second?
All in roll call vote?
But I thought we might be adding some language defining what commercial is. Did we?
This is just first reading, but the ordinance itself does not establish a policy. The ordinance provides authority to the city manager to adopt the policy, just as the special event policy is an administrative policy. The filming will be the same. It will be an administrative policy. It'll be posted on the web. And I made some notes as people were talking, because we have been working on that with staff to make sure, and I looked at it, it does define commercial. It makes it very clear. We'll make sure that to the extent that an educational program doesn't take up, closing streets and all of that wouldn't be captured under this. So that is something we will be working on. This authorizes city manager staff to put that in place.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Alderman Beidler.
Aye.
Alderman Morris.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Rummel.
Aye.
Alderman Preschlack.
Aye.
Alderman Kashgarian.
Aye.
Alderman Moreno.
Aye.
Alderman Bushman.
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay, motion carries.
Thank you very much, Leila. Nice job.
Thank you.
Last item on the agenda is additional items for discussion and comments by city council members. Is there anybody on the council that would like to comment about anything? Alderman Rummel.
I just wanted to make everyone aware that the Alderman Notes and I attended a meeting of the East Skokie Drainage District. They now have funding to do a very extensive stream bank restoration project on the southern section of the Skokie River. And so anyone who is adjacent to that, I believe, has already been given notice by the district. They had a public meeting. This is the second public meeting I have attended. But I just want to make everyone aware, sort of in that whole area of Whispering Oaks, this first project sort of ends where the ponds begin. So it goes from Old Elm Road south to where the ponds begin on Valley Road. So neighbors who back up off of Valley or off of Waveland will have their lots impacted by this project. So if anyone has any questions, Jason, is it okay if they call here and we can refer them to the East Skokie Drainage District and Brian Winter, who is their attorney, if they have any questions? And people who live in that area who want to take a walk by and perhaps look on the website for the East Skokie Drainage District to see the extent of this project. It will be some significant changes to the topography and the look of that stream bank, but it also is a relief to a lot of those homeowners who have had serious erosion problems along that area. But it is within our Lake Forest, and so we should all be aware of it, and citizens in that area, residents in that area, should be aware that this project is occurring. It's significant. It will be a lot of machinery that's going to be active in that area as well. So that, I just wanted to make everyone aware.
Thank you. Alderman Marino.
The beach is looking good, Mike. I was down there Sunday, beautiful weather, phenomenal.
Thank you.
So are we giving Mike credit for the weather as well? Like, day to day, nice day. If you could kind of keep it going like that for the rest of the month, that'd be nice.
That one good to know.
I have heard a number of positive comments just in passing around town about the snow plowing.
Yeah.
I think people really noticed the difference, and so great job on that. And obviously you've been able to get it into your schedule and logistically manage it such that people aren't complaining about delays in other parts of town. They're just talking about how great Waukegan and Route 60 looked the last couple of times it snowed, so thank you.
I'll actually add to that, we received our first check from IDOT today for 50% reimbursement
Wow.
for the year. Yeah.
And at the rate the winter's going, yeah,
We're ahead of the game.
we may come out ahead on this.
Cash it quick.
Okay, no further comments. I would then entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Everybody moved, okay.
Yeah, everybody moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, I voted. Any opposed? Okay, meeting is ended.
Filming one of the Batman films.